Hello and welcome to the Virtual Jug. This is a session that's kind of being controlled from my living room, so you can see here we have a nice fish tank and blah blah blah, and I'm nice and cozy on my sofa, as I'm sure many of you guys and girls are at home. Today is like 36th, 7th, 8th-ish session, and our first in April. So happy April 1st. And I'm super pleased and happy to have Marcus Eisel join us for the second time. Right, Marcus?
Yeah, hi Simon. Long time no see. It was last week, I guess, right?
It was a couple of weeks ago. Wait, last week? Was it already last week? Yeah,
It
I
was
guess it
last
was.
week, Javaland, right?
Yeah, so Marcus, you tell us a bit about JavaLand, actually. This is a conference which you have run now for 2 years, right?
Yeah, we had our second edition just 1 week back, so everybody should know it by now. Javaland.eu. It's probably the only conference happening in a theme park. Plus, having an amazing schedule with speakers from all over the world who never ever spoke their famous sessions in Germany before. So, whenever you get a chance to visit us next year, we'll be there.
And yeah, I've been there a couple of times now, and both times really superb. Particularly the lineup of speakers is really really great. Content was awesome.
Like,
And quick hello to Oleg as well. How you doing, Oleg?
Hi guys, I'm doing good. Well,
How's the Rebel Labs survey looking these days?
Rebel App survey on Java application performance and profilers is doing great. We're still giving 50 cents to charity for every field survey, so watch out for the links that I'll put in IRC and Twitter stream, and you can take it yourself if you're a Java developer and share with all the friends and colleagues, and would be happy to analyze the data and then provide you with a beautiful report. And at the same time, you can help disabled children to get some dog attention and some dogs to make their lives better. So
awesome, sounds good. If you wanna throw that link in IRC, I'll just share my screen very quickly and show you what we've got coming up. So today we have architecting large enterprise Java projects with Marcus Eisel. So this is going to be a really good experience-rich session from Marcus's years as a guy who's worked in enterprise and integration roles. If you wanted to follow Marcus on Twitter, he's a great follow. It's at MyFear, and I'll also drop a link into IRC chat so you can follow him there. Quick thank you to Zero Turnaround for sponsoring the Virtual Jug. Zero Turnaround have two products, JRebel and XRebel, and you can download them for free for 14 days to give them a spin. JRebel is a tool that reloads code changes instantly, and XRebel is a tool which allows you to profile your Java web apps during your development time. It's really non-intrusive and a great way to spend 5 minutes setting it up and running through your app. So that's well worth doing. Also, because it's April 1st, I'll mention a new tool which we've released this just today called ZipRebel, a tool which eliminates huge downloads by grabbing a huge byte stream and removing unnecessary zeros in your byte stream. We actually managed to download the entire internet the other day just for a single bit. Obviously, we haven't quite yet done Unzip Rebel, but that's a to-do. So if you want to help with that, please let me know. So yeah, quick April 1st. I know Marcus, you're very keen on April 1st jokes.
yeah, make sure it's open sourced, and I'm happy.
Make sure it's open source. It is open source actually. It is on GitHub right now. So maybe we should call it JBoss Zip Rebel, hey?
Not commenting on that one.
Okay, so if anyone wants to ask any questions, you're welcome to do so directly through IRC, and I'll interrupt Marcus as needed to pose them straight to him. So without further ado, sit back and enjoy and listen to Marcus teach us about enterprise applications.
Yeah, let's go. Oh, I forgot to pee. Okay, April's 1st jokes. I hate them. It's my second time here, right, Simon? So it's more than an honor to come back. And it's even more interesting because architecting large enterprise Java projects is kind of my favorite presentation. because this is the whole thing, what it's all about. I've been spending so many years in enterprise Java development. I mean, all of you know that being a developer advocate obviously is a cool job. Just look at what Simon does all the way, right? Cool puppies and running around on conferences. But actually, there has to be a reason that you are allowed to talk about things. And experience, obviously, is one of the main entry points here. So I've had a chance to really see what people been doing in enterprises all around the world, literally. And this was one of the main motivations for that talk, to just try to look a little bit at what people used to do over the times, and how that could fit and tie into what we're talking about today. Yeah, let's say microservices and stuff like that. So, but let's start at the very beginning. This is probably where I started my career. Back in J2EE times, on very, very low version numbers for decent J2EE servers. And whenever we had to implement something that had to sustain a decent load, then we actually used the fancy application servers. And not to mention the packaging hell, and further on the deployment hell, but we also had to deal with all kinds of, let's say, supporting environments like enterprise access management, or yeah, whatever you name them, right? Clustering was the the worst part ever. So every application server did that on their own way, like many other things. So portability and stuff like that hasn't been really addressed. Um, But that's only a very, very small subset of the technical implications that we had to deal with. As a matter of fact, what we used to build back in those days, I'd like to call them monolithic applications. So what we did was we packaged everything into a single EO file. I mean, multiple EO files when necessary. We thought about reusing stuff, but it was sharing jars between EO files. I couldn't even tell if I ever shared a single common framework between multiple projects. We tried doing it, but it mostly burned down to something that tried to be kind of a JPA implementation or whatever. Let's not talk about that. My favorite was we're pushing to production on April 1st, 9 a.m. Yeah, once or twice a year, right? So that's all that we could do. We had to test a little bit more than today, and we had to implement a lot more than we do today to make all things work. My most favorite thing beside that, single database scheme. I bet that at least half of you have seen a decent enterprise application and have seen the database schemes that used to lay behind them. And if a decent enterprise application costs a couple of $1 million, then it lives for a couple of, not million years, but at least, let's say, to double-digit number of years. And looking back at that initial idea about how that database scheme should have looked like compared to where we ended with, it was just amazingly large. 500,000 lines of code is more like the lower boundary for those kind of projects. I guess I've seen anything up to more than 16 million lines of code. Let's not talk about that. Heavyweight infrastructure is something that I'd like to call everything that is not lightweight, like all the big blue and big red offerings. Yeah, starting WebSphere back in the days, how long did that take, Simon? 15 minutes?
Well, I mean, interestingly, some of the people I've talked to since I've been at Zero Turnaround with kind of JRebel, it's really ranged from anything from 5 to 10 minutes up to the longest I've seen is an hour and a half. But we're talking like ridiculously huge applications here.
Yeah, that's pretty much what I'm talking about here. So that's what I'd like to call heavyweight. Thousands of test cases, right? So I mean,
so this is obese weight infrastructure I'm talking about.
totally. Thousands of test cases is pretty much a good thing. I mean, you need to know whenever I got called into those kind of projects, just a couple of years back, that something hit the fan, and we were about to hit boundaries that we shouldn't never even be close to. So, test cases always has been a good way for me to try to familiarize myself with the whole business case and with the whole application. But looking at them mostly revealed that there aren't any decent test cases anymore. So whatever the team did over the last half a year, that barely makes the ship sink, at least it hasn't been tested. Speaking about team and QA implications of those kind of really weird dinosaur applications, it's been huge teams. 20 members, easy. 200 members, possible. And of course, the test cycle for the whole thing was multi-month, right? So it's just not been fully automated. Most of that was put into Excel sheets and executed by testers, like people. Bug databases, feature databases, full. Um, Anything like acceptance testing, not there. Technical design approaches, maybe on paper, but J2E actually is a technical design approach. That's what I heard a lot back in the days, so they didn't actually bother with that too much. Interestingly, you rarely find real business components in those really old applications. So most of the applications are cut in a very technical way. So beginning from the persistence with kind of the business middle tier and some UI stuff, but very rarely domain driven in terms of design. Yeah, and the whole mess, like spaghetti ball, required multi-team involvement and somebody who really needs to understand the whole application left to right to just make teensy changes. And even then, those applications just won't die. So even if they are 5 years old, they still fulfill their business case, and people have the desire to change them and to evolve them. And there are even more reasons for that. Just think about legal reasons, right? So whenever the EU introduces a new law, then stuff might change. Just think about insurances or whatever banking things they come up with. So the issue is that those new features um, tend to be very, very huge. And if you really think about implementing cross-cutting concerns into applications that are designed like that, it tends to be something close to impossible. We should have learned that lesson, and we all have thought about the why a lot. Like this is just a very short snap. We talked about, oh, it's all technical debt. We never got a chance to actually update what we've been growing. The whole application just has been grown, right? So there has not been anything like a level plan. We just started something, and we never ever oversaw what we were going to be. Or maybe we were just lazy and we didn't care so much about what we were doing. But most likely I heard something like, the infrastructure is outdated, we never got a WebSphere upgrade. All the seniors have been pulled from the team, so we ended up having a bunch of inexperienced people trying to work on magics that some gurus implemented back in the days. And nobody actually sit back and relax or joined the VJ bug to get education on new technologies or methodologies. So all those might be reasons that this changed, thankfully, luckily. Um, but where did we actually go from here? I think most significantly that we try to no longer change those systems, but we just started to treat them as legacy systems, and started to put something in the middle, like the famous enterprise service bus. So we ended up having a bunch of whatever legacy systems, and those legacy systems, they they have been integrated with standards like web services, right? Um, we try to just build some pipes in between. We had a famous ESB, which we could orchestrate some flows in. Um, It was enterprise level. It was something that really was selling towards big enterprises because everything was just a click away. So nobody really had to think about it anymore, like in changing the old applications. We just started to put all the logic and transformation and routing into the enterprise service bus. It was centralized, which is a compelling idea for people that actually want to control all the infrastructures in one organization. Yep, it had license fees. It still has. The bigger the ESB in terms of megabytes, the bigger the license fees. Um, the end of the day, we had to web service everything that we had. So there wasn't that much one because we still had to change and implement web services interfaces at the right places in the old applications. The technical implications were still there. We still had very large code bases. And we gained some new problems along the way, like totally bloated IDEs. Um, One favorite of mine is a 2.5 gigabyte download, just the raw IDE with all the fancy ESB orchestration tools and whatever the vendor had to offer. The
You're
whole
talking about RAD, aren't you?
Yeah, this is one good example. Actually, I was looking at the other side of things, like Oracle's JDeveloper is something that I really dislike.
Okay.
Um, Hard to understand and modify. I mean, that's where we ended up, right? So everything was centralized in one kind of business ESB routing model, and yeah, it was hard to test. This is a thing that I've been seeing so many times. A centralized ESB component, a bunch of applications, let's call them legacy applications, and they've been splattered all over the infrastructure. Like one was delivered by one ISV, the other one was just, let's say, an SAP-based system, and everything had to be there. So to really test everything, you need to have multiple infrastructures in place. And yeah, most likely they only had test data, so not even real data. Unbelievable.
So,
Yeah.
so Marcus, we've got an interesting question here from Coffee Mock in IRC. Now he's asking, or she's asking, should we drop the term application and just talk about components or services these days? And you were talking about legacy applications, but going forward, I mean, is this a mindset thing where if we talk about them as components and services, we're more likely to think in a more modular way, or is this just a kind of branding exercise?
Give me a couple of more minutes and I get there. I'm still kind
Okay.
of in the retro perspective phase, so looking at what we've been through, and I'll come to the point where we look at what we could do better and what today's approaches are actually. Okay, complex dependencies. Funny enough, even the smallest changes, like in just changing some routing on the ESB, generate a huge impact. Um, think about the different domain objects like a user or a customer in bigger ESB-based projects. So a customer might be something totally different in pre-sales than it is in after-sales, right? So just making a small change here from left to right, the wrong mapping, and everything screws up. Scaling ESBs is totally, let's say, proprietary and difficult, so you need a lot of experience here. And yeah, it was mostly rewired. I mean, that was one of the biggest sales pitches for ESBs, I guess, back in the days. Stop coding, just start painting. Um, Data segmentation is another thing, like the customer or the corporate-wide data models. I heard a lot of companies try that, even German ones, big ones, and I think they at least don't push it any further as of today. Scaling in general, looking at all the systems that are involved with that kind of integration solutions, that's been a hard thing, especially if the monitoring wasn't well. So yeah, all that obviously doesn't work that well. I mean, don't get me wrong, you can make that work, and many implementations that I've seen actually had some really large ESBs running, very centralized infrastructures, integrating mid-sized double-digit numbers of other systems and create something new. But it had its challenges, and it has as of today. But the question is, what are we doing today? Simon, do you know what that is?
It looks like a social network or something like that.
Yeah, kind of. It's kind of social. It's the only picture I can find on the net about Netflix architecture. So this thing is scary to me, but obviously we know Netflix is state of the art when it comes to microservices and components, and so it actually didn't help me to get rid of all the fears that has been introduced to me looking back at ESB-based integration solutions. But as a matter of fact, you can call it whatever you like, but the only way forward from here, with all the lessons that we've learned over the past couple of, I don't know, 14 years or even more, we definitely need to decompose what we used to build back in those days. Like the monolithic applications need to turn into something new. And just to introduce that buzzword I've been trying to talk around, it might be something like microservices. And the idea behind that is not not very new. Um, Even if Martin Fowler took it and recoined it a little bit, the idea behind all of that is to encapsulate the source of change in a way that you don't actually screw up a whole system by just changing a single line of code. Okay, so far so good. That sounds easy. But the question is how to find the right service. And here's the homework for today for all listeners, because if you really have the pleasure to start kind of a greenfield approach, and you just need to implement something new, which is a very big relief, believe me, um, then you could look out for all those keywords. My favorite here is just go down the domain-driven design way. Look out for bounded contexts. Um, Make sure whatever you set up is totally designed for 100% automation, and make sure that services are designed for failure. I have some more pointers for you later on in that presentation, but those are, let's say, the easiest attributes that I could throw at you to dig into for the next couple of weeks. Easter's upcoming, so there's plenty of time to read and research. Actually might do another session if I get re-invited again. So let's see. What we are talking about today is more like how to evolve the existing application into something that really makes sense looking at it today. So we're not going to get rid of all those multi-million-dollar projects. Some customers paid for that, and I'm pretty sure that we're still working on them, and we just need to make sure that we don't keep staying in that technical debt situation. So the whole thing needs to change and evolve over time. And if you are looking for good service candidates, then you could go down different roads here. So most likely use case driven approaches might work for older projects. You could also go down and try to find some nouns and make them into services, or you could go into the utility area and see if you can find some service ideas that follow the single responsibility principle. There's another axis here which talks about scaling microservice, and this is actually the most interesting find I've done while researching around microservices for myself. If you look down at the 8-point URL I put at the bottom of the slide, this one was actually published 2008 already. So scalable web architectures and ideas how to scale services have been around for quite a while. But at least I have to admit that I kept ignoring them and just also try to make the things work that vendors throw at me, which is kind of my pity. But anyway, so what's left here? We're talking about Java EE applications. The question is, what do I need to do to teach Java EE how to do microservices? Looking at a very easy deployment, like just a single ear. This is what we have today, and this is what it could look like tomorrow. So, assuming that we found a reasonable service that we want to exclude and that we evolve into something new, um, then we just need some glue code. Most likely, if you are going down the JAX-RS way and want to use HTTP as a protocol to access your services, then you need to tie in some client libraries. Depending on the EE version you're running on, it's probably not going to be E7 already. You definitely need to have something in between to make that new service work with your old application. But if you spend all the efforts carving out the individual service, which might be your AA first implementation ever, then you're free to use it from all the other applications that are upcoming or even multiple times inside your already existing application. There's another little thing that I put in here. It's a cache. This is something that I learned playing around a little bit with those service ideas and designs in Java EE. And if you're following my blog, I also had the pleasure to interview another German, Nico Kögler, who was doing performance comparisons between Node.js and Wildfly, looking at asynchronous JAX-RS implementations. So in theory and in practice, some Java EE implementations actually have the capability to perform very well when it comes to web services or JAX-RS based services. So you will have to access a bunch of data, and depending on how you do that, you might go better if you use a cache here and make sure that your services can respond extremely fast. So services definitely will need to have another way of accessing data in the backend. We all should know what Java EE is, right? So this is the whole stack. Looking at it, it's a hell lot. This is pretty much what we need, right? So this could be your first ever microservice, and I'm definitely not the first one pledging for that simple approach. I think Adam Bean called those picoservices already, so it's not even scary. The scary part is that our application servers actually have that many features around Java EE, and this is something that I've seen a lot at conferences lately. Whenever I talked about enterprise designs or microservices, nobody is trying to use Java EE as a base for that, because those containers have that history of being bloated. Even if Wildfly is obviously lightning fast, and we have some other examples out there that aren't that bad. I shouldn't talk about Tommy Tribe, but yeah, those guys actually have a good thing running with Tommy E, and they start up pretty easy. Of course, it's not a single jar that you just have to start, but let's assume that the next Java EE 8 version might take all this into account, and it allows us something that we could strip down the whole specification into our individual microservices profiles. That would be something on my wish list. Haven't seen something like that before, but yeah. If you get a chance, EE as the specification is open, so make your voice heard on the users list whenever you're playing around with that. And that's all. Seriously, there's not much more magic behind it, beside all those big red letters, right? So we talked about the lightweight runtime. Is that EE as of today? We could probably do better. Have we thought about cross-service security? Is that something in EE? That wasn't an April Fool's joke, Simon, right? So IBM recently joined the security JSR upcoming in EE8. Okay, we'll see. We might actually get something like cross-service security. JAX-RS and transaction management, that might be another challenge. Let's talk about scaling. Individual service scaling in one EE container. Not at the moment. Load balancing isn't part of the spec. What else do we have? We have deployment. Still very bloated. I mean, even if we use WAR files, could be easier. Configuration, there is eventually a configuration JSR upcoming, but still service discovery is open. EE doesn't support versioning. Monitoring isn't covered by the spec in a decent depth that I'd like to see for microservices. Let's not talk about governance. So EE microservice actually needs a little bit more than just what EE as a specification has to offer as of today. So there's another layer that actually is something that we'd like to talk about, which is, I mean, to run an app server, you need the JVM and you need some kind of host system. I think the original virtualization approach is something that is still broadly used out there with customers. So there is a lot of things to actually do if we really think about running one service in an application server in the whole VM. We're talking about spinning up gigabytes for one service. Really? Do we want to do that? I think we don't, and nobody should even think about it. But what we really could think about is doing something like Docker, which could make things a significant amount easier. Still, we have that overhead, but looking at things like the new Atomic host and looking at all the easier already available Docker images, things might really be practical at the end. And we don't have to download a complete pre-installed VM of whatever with tons of stuff in it that we really don't want to care about. Just for the curious listeners, JBoss has a nice microsite, jboss.org/docker, where you find a bunch of our community projects bundled as Docker files, so you could just play around there. Assuming that Docker is part of our solution, we at least have something, not a lightweight runtime, but we have pre-configured images that we could just duplicate, roll out, and spin up easy. We have an idea about scaling that might work, and assuming that we could put everything in terms of configuration into those images, even that might work. And we might be able to work around asynchronous versus synchronous if we have a lot of instances and we have some more JMS in between. So I think that we could solve some issues. But still, there's a hell lot of open points here, which are still red. My approach here, and as a matter of fact, I'm not going to present the whole solution today. I'm just thinking out loud to you. I think that going down the microservices road from a Java EE perspective actually requires something that I'd like to call evolutionary design. So this is not going to be a big clash. And whoever of you has been working with those enterprisey projects and in those settings knows what I'm talking about. This is the only way to go further. A very simple, complete EE microservice example, just on paper, could look something like that. So left to right, we have our client didn't change. We still have load balancers. What's pretty new is that we want to expose a very, very defined API with versions, which is not changing with every single change that we do in the services. So having some kind of an API gateway in between to abstract those levels might be helpful. Another component needs to be security. So that is something that we don't have in EE. Actually, we need some security out of the container. Service AA plus everything around the Java EE container and cache and database access is obviously the application server. And another way is the service registry. I'm just laying over here some community projects that you find around JBoss. This is all open source. It's meant to be kind of a look at it and play around with it. There are very decent documentations, especially Fabric 8, which is one of my favorites. And if you look around a little bit on my SlideShare account or even on my blog, then you find some more features about what Fabric 8 really can do in terms of service management and microservices, but still also probably a homework slide for you. I'm not going to dig into that any deeper. Time is running pretty quickly today. What's left is, I mean, given the fact that we have an infrastructure to run Java EE enterprise microservices, we still need to think about how to structure microservices. Assuming that we've been successful in extracting, let's say, a handful of them out of what we call legacy application, then we need to think about how those services work together. And this is by any mean a complete listing, and anything that people have agreed upon. It's just a bunch of thoughts that we in Red Hat came up with. So I'm happy to receive your feedback and ideas whenever you have them. Just send them my way. Twitter works great, at myfear, or even marcus@jbus.org is also going to reach me. I'm very happy to receive your feedback on that. So aggregator pattern is something that we all know from different technology. If you look at mobile applications, actually, all the things that you have running on your Android or any other mobile device, they have backend JAX-RS interfaces to services. And the one thing that those clients really do is they aggregate all the services, and the service orchestration is all happening in the client itself. There might be some proxying or load balancing infrastructure in between, which is pretty much transparent. So the aggregator pattern is the straightforward way to use things. Totally separated services that access individual databases. Might be a good way to start things. Looking further down, we have something that's called chain services in that presentation, which basically means that one service is calling another service, and that those calls get chained. Probably not infinite, but to a decent amount. If you think that through, then you end up with something that Netflix actually called fan-out effect. So one service calling another, calling two others, calling three others. This is something that you need to carefully look into what you're really trying to achieve here. But I think it's a valid pattern. You can also combine patterns, of course. One thing that I'd like to see as a branch pattern is when the application service RE, like the one in the middle with the big two arrows, accesses two other services. This is something where one service call branches out to two new service calls. Shared resources is a specialty. One of the requirements that I initially showed you was that I think services should have totally separated databases. I think that won't be practical to no extent, especially not in enterprises, and not even thinking about it when you try to evolve something existing. So there will be some kind of services that actually share the same resource. And this is what I like to see as shared resource pattern. You see that the whole architecture gets a little bit more complicated. Another thing that really bugs me a lot when people talk about microservices is that everybody is talking about RESTful services. It seems to be a no-brainer for everybody, but there's definitely another mechanism that we could use, which is queuing. Like, so we could use asynchronous messaging, not only with active and queue, but there, beside the fact that it's asynchronous and could take a lot of load out of the whole system, we also could use stuff like transactions with queues. So yes, we introduced something like a broker eventually, but I think this might be the teensy drawback looking at the chance that we have to introduce some really, really performant services that work together, even if we hit a fan-out effect at some point. So asynchronous messaging is totally valid for me when it comes to designing services as a pattern. It's easy as that, isn't it? Looks pretty compelling, and I think there's a lot of food for thought in it, especially for designs. But still, don't forget that there are tons of drawbacks and tons of things that you need to keep in mind. You have a complex runtime, no matter which road you go down to. So the number of moving parts is exploding. Lessons learned, distributed systems are totally complex. If you start to use something like Fabric 8 and really start to deploy individual services to a variety of instances, let's just look at on-premise installations versus cloud installations, totally feasible. It could be that services end up on multiple instances across all whatever logical infrastructure you have. Decentralized data is seriously going to be a big issue. There are some ideas out there how to solve that, like JBoss data virtualization, which could be something to abstract a ton of different data sources into a common data model. And we'll see. Communication between services is something, depending on the protocol that you're using or introducing here, there is something that you need to configure. And network has also some drawbacks here, like you end up having a bunch of latencies that you never expected to see. You need to decide on how to communicate between those services, and the communication overhead is also something that we know since longer, so keep that in mind. What I've not touched so far is that you need to make your services resilient. You need to have some kind of failure handling, especially if you start to using chained services or the branch pattern. If one service breaks, you need to have a way to recover from the whole system. And yes, the service metadata registry is also something that, I mean, there is no metadata model that we could use out of the box as of today. You need to come up with a bunch of good ideas what to put in there. And the question mark in the middle of that slide just indicates that we're still only touching the very surface of issues. And especially looking at what Java EE has to offer here, it's still kind of disappointing, which doesn't mean that Java EE is the wrong way to go down to. It's definitely a challenge, but it's exactly where many enterprises are as of today, so I think it's totally valid to solve those points bits by bits. Another thing that comes up frequently when we're talking about microservices is DevOps. The ideas behind that are not new, out there since a while, and I could totally support what they stand for. So it's definitely a huge plus if you're going into the microservices direction, if you have a fully automated, fully skilled, and DevOps-enabled team that is working on that. Looking at a 200-people project, that might look like a challenge. Looking at some industries, especially banking or finance, banking or insurances, that might look like a challenge. But that's definitely something that you need to work on if you are really willing to go into that direction. But still, it's only the beginning. At least to me, the industry is learning a lot, and if you just look for solutions for individual problems like collecting log files of all services in one place, or adding circuit breaker to your microservice architectures, or having orchestration on top of your Docker containers or whatever. There are some projects out there that actually can help you with that. Takeaway for today is probably that crucial is the functional decomposition for whatever you are thinking about in terms of microservices. I think it's fair to say that it's pretty hard to get right from the start, so prepare to change it. And the second lesson is whatever you have in terms of a modular system can definitely easily evolve into microservices. If you have a big ball of mud, it might be very, very hard to find the right service cut and to extract the right features here. So the better you are in terms of existing software design, the easier will the step be into the direction for microservices. At the end of the day, you will need to have, as always, balance the needs with the cost. So it's definitely something that I don't think might be a good fit for everything and all your problems, but it has solutions for some problems. And as I said, the crucial success factor for me is to work it in evolutionary. So don't try to make that big bang thing. Are microservices here to stay, Simon?
That's an interesting question. I think the technology is more ready than the people who are there to support it and develop it right now. So I think that's going to be an interesting stage.
Absolutely. I think nobody can tell right now. What I think it is a feasible design approach, and it definitely helps you having more maintainable applications. So what I think that the monolithic applications are pretty much dead. So that's been 40 minutes, and I'm at my end. The presentation actually has a bunch of links for everybody to dig into a little bit deeper, but I'd like to take some questions if we have some more around on Twitter or somewhere. Otherwise, I am finished so far. Stop
Yeah,
sharing. Give me my screen.
we do have some questions. Actually, one interesting thing that I was thinking about just when you were showing that last slide about from monolithic applications, going obviously from monolithic legacy style applications, people tend not to even want to touch them anyway, even to kind of upgrade things. So when you're talking about moving from those kind of monolithic applications to a microservice, how do you even go about starting something like that? Because typically, in my experience, these kind of monolithic applications aren't even modular in any sense. So trying to define microservices from them, that's like a huge job, right?
Yeah, actually, the question is where to begin. So for me, it turned out to be very successful if I try to wrap up a little bit and try to introduce like a domain model, try to introduce a business view on everything. This is something that most of those applications don't have in terms of documentation. So that some business people need to rework that and present it to you. And if you start investigating how the code is structured, you will most likely have a chance to actually carve out at least something that is a little bit bigger eventually as a service, like a microservice. But it's a pretty good start. And what I did is I actually didn't deploy it as part of the old legacy application, but I started to introduce a separate physical instance and had all my new code on a completely separate code base. So I really tried to just have interfaces in the old applications, carve every features out there, and implement something new which really fulfills the business needs. So it's a partial rewrite together with kind of a porting probably to a new technology stack, which is a good chance. And that worked for me pretty well in the past, even with the biggest project.
And the most important thing is tests, right?
Yeah, that's a lesson we all should have learned. There's so many out there. Yes, Achillean, which is one of my favorites since years, even before joining Red Hat. So as of today, Achillean has something that's called Cube. So it can control Docker instances. Going onto the new stack using all the Docker magic, you have a total integration testing suite that can be used together with that containers. There's not much more you can wish for, so just implement tests, please, everybody.
Okay, cool. So let's go to IRC now. So, quick question from Harmeet Singh, talking about how you make Java EE architecture reactive. So, I mean, would you just use something like RxJava, or do you think there need to be tighter integrations into the EE stack?
Yeah, my heart bleeds. I don't think that that might be the right platform to think about reactive programming. I mean, we still have something like Vertex. If you're on Java, this is probably a way to go down. Microservices is pretty much a concept, and I'm not pitching to no extent that Java EE is the only implementation for it. But enterprises typically are not running Vertex in some corner of their data center, so we just have to run with what we have.
Okay, cool. Another question about the services chain, which you mentioned.
Mhm.
Um, uh, Coffee Mock asks, isn't a services chain very vulnerable for failures in one of the beads?
Circuit breaker,
Pretty much, yeah.
Hystrix, yeah, go dig down deeper. I'd love to actually see a little bit more about the Netflix architecture at that point. Yes, definitely. It's something that I'd prevent looking at it on an architectural pattern view. It makes my heart bleed. But there are solutions around that. I skipped that intentionally in the patterns.
And in terms of, I mean, everyone t tends to use Netflix as I guess, the golden example of microservices. Is that a sign really that microservices are so hard to implement and maintain as a team, that this isn't just something so anyone can pick up and change their monolith applications into, this kind of like perfect microservice architecture? Surely, if it was easy, then we would have a large number of examples other than Netflix to talk about, right?
Yeah. I think Netflix just had was lucky enough to have the most skilled developers and the most venture capital and the most engaged people at designing their software, which lead to a total new approach. I think I see my personal responsibility more in exploring the possibilities of microservices and finding the right fit. So I tend to be a very binary person, but looking at the software industry, there are a lot of tools that you could use. And I've rarely seen a single situation where you only have one tool for one problem.
Hmm.
So there there are approaches for all problems out there. And I think it's a big failure to even distantly believe that microservices could be the solution to all your problems.
Hmm. There's an interesting discussion with Coffee Mark and John Yeary actually in the chat as well around the translation boundaries, and what they're talking about is when you have microservices which are communicating with each other, it's important to have the necessary contexts on both sides so that they can execute the necessary code that they need to. So in terms of that, how much of a lag, how much of an overhead is that in order to get to the communication right when you do break from a big app into lots of little services?
I think that heavily depends on the amount of context that is really needed. We all have been sticking all kinds of cross-session information to threads or whatever in Java E before. Um, and that's been, yeah, 30 megabyte sessions passing around or whatever. So yes, this is a challenge, and I doubt that there might be a single answer. I
Hmm.
try to really reduce that to the bare minimum, and my two approaches would be to have a common data model for those two services and at least agree um, on the unique versions of their business entities that they had to exchange. And you need some kind of security ideas and context that you could pass around. But it can't be the solution to just open up the interfaces and put everything in there and make them broad. But it's definitely not the right way.
Hmm. Um, so I'm just asking if there's any final questions in IRC. One question from me. I guess we've got another session next week, actually from Josh Long around microservices in the spring. We've talked about Java EE here. In terms of an OSGI environment where everything, modularity is obviously built in from the core. Services, or the idea is your bundles are typically very, very small. That there's already a lot of the services which you mentioned, particularly with the enterprise OSGI, pushing into more of the, I guess, typical QoSs and services that application servers already have developed. Do you think OSGI has any part to play in microservices, or do you think they've already had 10 to 15 years at this and haven't got there yet?
It's hard. I mean, first of all, I strongly believe that microservices has nothing to do with implementations at all. So if Josh is talking about Spring, that might be a great fit. If I'm talking about camel routes, that might be a microservice in another world. And today we're talking about Java EE and how to evolve that into microservices. So bottom line, there are many, many different implementations and ideas how to make that work. I think for me personally, OSGI has been proven to be complex, but I have a Java EE background, and that I know many people that think OSGI is the best that ever happened. So I can't judge. Yes, it looks compelling, and yes, it's a very easy way to start things. There are servers like Karaf, which don't bring all that overload in terms of Java EE specification. I'm not saying that is the wrong way to do it.
Okay, sounds good. So I don't have any more questions in IRC. Any questions from you, Oleg?
Well, one thing is, so you're having a monolith application, and then you break it down into microservices. So where do you think it's better to stop? Do you really want to go into a single responsibility principle, like up to wrapping Unix utilities into like microservice and just calling them, or do you stop at the use case level, or how to judge that the best way?
I have an answer which might look like an April Fool's joke, but actually, I mean, if I would be able to answer your question on a general level, like here and today, I probably would have the best job in the world, highly paid, and everybody wants to have me. Um, I think from all what I know is that this might highly depend on your software and business requirements. And I think that there are so many situations where microservices will never be a good fit. So I don't have a general answer on that one.
Okay, awesome. So yeah, uh, what's left to say, I guess, is a massive, massive thank you to Marcus. There's a lot of really good discussion actually in IRC, and I'll make that available certainly at the on the VJUG website. Um, and Marcus, if you hang on this hangout, I'll stop the broadcast and we'll have a Rebel Labs interview straight after. And to everyone watching, that's going to be available on the Rebel Labs website, and I'll link that through from the virtual jug site. So yeah, once again, thanks very much, Marcus. Really, really interesting, and obviously experienced talk from what you've learned over the years. And we'll chat very, very soon. So thanks very much, guys.
Thanks again for having me. I'll come back whenever you need me.
Excellent.
Bye bye.
Cheers. Bye.